Thank you. Yeah, you are most welcome for the today's session. My name is Accredited Simon, the chairperson of Education and Training Committee, and it is a good opportunity to welcome our today's presenter, Professor David Regan, for today's session, the anatomy of the needle and the ergonomics of stitching. Yeah, waiting it right all the time. So this is an interesting topic of today that will be amazing for us that are operating theater. So TORG is an initiative of our founder at the Busora that has been initiated for a long time. And among them, we have education for theater staff. And today's session, to increase our knowledge, we will discuss on our today's topic. So we are targeting theater personnel, doctors, nurses, perfusionists, and so on. And you have many countries that has been represented: Botswana, Namibia, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, United Kingdom, Malaysia, Philippines, and the other countries that I have not said today. But all countries are represented, including our country, Rwanda. So you are welcome, Professor David Regan. But before you are presented today, I welcome the one at the Nick to tell us your biography today. Then after the biography, we will welcome you and then we will listen to your presentation of today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. I welcome every one of us. I'm actually delighted to also welcome our esteemed speaker for today's webinar on the anatomy of the needle and the ergonomics of stitching, getting it right all the time. As operating room personnel, we understand the critical role that proper stitching plays in patient care and outcomes. So today we have the privilege of learning from an expert in the field who will provide valuable insights on this important topic. So today we have Professor O. Regan, who is the founder and CEO of the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills, BBASS, and he is a professor in the Medical Education and Research Unit of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He served as a consultant adult cardiac surgeon at the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust in the United Kingdom from the year 2001 to 2022. He has been instrumental in advancing surgical education and training. He also established the Yorkshire Health Centre Wet Lab, raising over £60,000 to create a state-of-the-art skill center. He has also developed national training courses, including the critically acclaimed PAR Excellence and PAR Aorta, which has been running for over 2 decades now. Through BBASS, Professor O. Regan has created techniques-based system for mastering surgical skills using low-fidelity models, garnering a global following. He has also played a key role in professionalizing surgical trainers as the director of the Faculty of Surgical Trainers at the Royal College FRCSEd, and he has been a visiting professor at Imperial College, London. Notably, TORG and BBASS are officially partners, reflecting a shared commitment to advancing surgical education. So I encourage you all, every one of us here at today's webinar, to actively participate, ask questions, and engage in discussions to make the most of this learning opportunity. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor David J. O. Regan. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction. And I'm delighted to be with you this morning. It is actually 1 o'clock in the morning in Kuala Lumpur. I'm usually live on Monday evenings on Medall, and this is free and available to all people around the globe. The moment we have a following of 4,245 people in 112 countries. There's catch-up as well, and that is free. And what I'm summarizing this evening is part of a 4-part series that is on catch-up, but I'm regularly revisiting these topics. The other thing I didn't put in the biography is, yes, I am a black belt in martial arts. I started my journey 9 years ago, and at the time I looked at the wall and the colors of the belts from red through to black and felt that there's no way I was going to get past green or blue or even purple. But 9 years on, I'm still training, and I'm going for my 4th dan in karate. And what is interesting about karate is that it's broken down into techniques and forms and katas, and you repeat them again, again, and again. And you practice them until you can't get them wrong. And at grade A, which is a 3-hour session of extreme physical exercise in Japanese, you're asked to go through these forwards, backwards, and repeat when you're mentally and physically exhausted. My last grading was 18 months ago for my 3rd dan, and I actually dropped 7 pounds in weight with sweat on the floor. I'm not suggesting that surgical training should be as arduous, but the discipline of regular practice is needed. The thing is that nobody has described how to practice, offered any models, or explained why we do many things. And that is why I came up with the idea of the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills. And I've broken down all these skills into belts, from red belt to black belt. So what I'm showing you this evening is just a flavor of a deconstruction of one element of surgery in general. But like all sports, it all starts with the basics. And what we're not very good at in surgery is explaining the basics. And I'm sure you would have been in theatre and taken a stitch, and the senior surgeon would say, not like that, like this, but not explained what this means. The other thing is, I did a study which is published in the Journal of Surgical Education that looked at all stitching courses around the world, and I had 109 photographs, and 102 of them showed people sitting down to practice basic skills. Now, this is very worrying because most surgeons, most of the time, are standing. But then we have a problem too, because 95% of surgeons during the course of their lifetime will actually end up with musculoskeletal degeneration of the spine and the back because they're hunched over tables, the chin is coming forward, and at each inch you're adding another 2 kilograms to the head. The other thing is your shoulders end up forwards as well. And it's important for us to be operating correctly and relaxed is to stand with your shoulders down, your elbows by the side, like this. And your hands are palmar flexed. Your elbows are slightly extended, and it's a bit like a puppet. But with the elbows down and the shoulders by the side, you've actually then not using all those major muscles to support your humerus and scapula. Try it for yourself for a few minutes. Stand there for a few minutes, like with your arms up in the air. Do it as you're washing, and I'll continue talking. The thing is that if you're standing properly, what you're doing is actually got everything relaxed, and you're isolating the intrinsic muscles of the hands. Anybody can name the muscle that does this? Put it in the chat. I can't see the chat. My screen has actually gone small. I'll go big. Can you name the muscle that does that? really, those are the lumbricals. And together with the opponents is bringing the palps of the fingers together to enable you to feel. And the whole thing about surgery is feel. So we're talking about the needle tonight. And we need to know not only how to stand, but we also need to know how to hold an instrument properly. All needles are made in a circle. And the principle is to take that needle perfectly round the circle on a circumference. And the action of pronation and supination does exactly that. But I'll demonstrate something to you now, that if I put my fingers through the needle holder, like that, that's how people hold the needle, and I'm now going to rotate. If you look carefully, the end of the needle holder is moving round and round. But if I actually put a straw in there and I rotate, pronate, supinate, I barely get 180 degrees. What we recommend is that we hold the needle holder in the palm of our hand, and we align the needle holder between the index finger, the middle finger, and along the axis of rotation of pronation and supination. And you know that because that's actually how you hold a screwdriver. And you can use the screwdriver anywhere, any awkward angle, and affect pronation and supination. So if I show you pronation and supination, palming the needle holder, you'll now appreciate that I've got probably 270 degrees of rotation. And I can affect that rotation at any angle and any position. To practice this takes a little time. Note that my fifth finger and my ring finger are folded over the rings of the needle holder. My index finger is extended down the needle holder, giving me direction and proprioception. And this is the tricky bit, how to lock and unlock. And what I'm doing is effectively unlocking by using my abductor pollicis, opening it and closing it. And that takes a bit of practice. And I'd recommend that you get a needle holder if you can't do this, and put it in your pocket and walk around. The way to do that is to think about the angles that are involved. Now, I've demonstrated to you that we're going to be standing at the table. The standing means that there's an angle between the horizontal here and my forearm. Now, you need to think about that angle as that is the angle that we now need to actually mount the needle. So the needle has a number of parts. The needle has the point end, and that usually is 1/3 from the tip. And we won't go into the different types of tips. They're cutting, round or blunt, but they're all tapered, reverse cutting, forward cutting, all machined for different purposes. But that part of the needle here is the part of the needle that is necessary for cutting or going into the tissue. The back end of the needle here is called the swage, where the suture is incorporated into the needle. In fact, what's at the point there, there's a little hole into which the suture goes and is crimped. What it means is that the working part of the needle is this middle part here. And that is the part that you need to pick up. I know before anybody makes a stitch whether the stitch is going to be successful or not, merely by looking at how the needle is picked up. And that needs to be picked up on 3 principles. 1, it's got to be picked up just beyond the halfway mark. 2, there shouldn't be any space between the shaft and the tip. So I should be able to run my fingers across the shaft, feel the tip and the shaft. There's no space. And 3, and this is the angle, the needle is angled out. We are always operating at depth. And if you don't angle that out, you'll find that the needle is not sitting sagittally to the plane. And you cannot rotate it. So the principle of all operating is, 1, mount your needle correctly. And when I'm looking at people stitching, particularly with continuous stitches, they're focusing so much on making the stitch, but they're not focusing on how they pick the needle up. This determines the accuracy of the rotation of the needle through the tissue all the time. But understanding these angles and adhering to that is all part of your setup. And when you think about golf or any sports, people are taught about the setup. And I call this diastolic learning, because the action of stitching, the systole, is fixed. The time it takes me and you to put a needle through the tissues is much the same. But the time it takes me to do the next stitch and you would be vastly different. And that is what I call the systole. And the systole is determined by your understanding and practice of the setup. And the setup, for 1, is halfway along the needle, no space between the tip and the shaft, and it's angled out. And I'm going to try to come over again with the camera, and I've got a serious problem here. That is really upset the presentation. I'm not sure why it's actually doing it. So let me just try.
Go higher, David.
No, I've actually got a serious technical error here, which has really made this problematic. So I'll try it from this angle. So the difficulty is that if you take your needle down, you don't mount it properly, there you go, and that's how it's often given to you. It's not at halfway, there's a gap, but just notice that if I take it down, that the needle is not actually sitting perpendicular to the tissue, and it's rotated. And that is where you start actually causing damage, not only by poor rotation of the needle, but also because the tip of the needle will be pressing into the tissue. So one of the models that I've used in this is I take a microwave potato. Remember, microwave potatoes are very hot. But to help me with this understanding of the setup, I draw right-angled lines across the potato. Now, being a hemisphere, this gives me 5 opportunities to practice my needle rotation on the top, away from me, towards me, to my right, and the other side. And to actually do this, I take the needle down and align it 90 degrees across what I want to stitch, and I rotate it back, so it's 90 degrees into what I want to stitch. And then I simply rotate it round. Now, the tissue will hold the needle for you. And holding the needle for you, it'll allow you to pick it up, and if you're doing it properly, the needle will come out at 90 degrees. So you continue to deliver the needle until It is just beyond the halfway, and then you continue the rotation. And I'm holding the needle correctly again. So, place 90 degrees across what you want to stitch. You're going to rotate it backwards to point 90 degrees into what you want to stitch. Now, there's a movement there which, in the pronation, enables me to automatically unlock the needle. And in unlocking the needle, I now can continue this rotation through the tissue and bring the needle up carefully and take it out. And there, the angle is maintained and the position is maintained. Once you understand the angles, this is now, without using the forceps, you can pirouette the needle over the top each time to forehand and pirouette it over the top to backhand. I do not need my forceps to actually practice that at all. And all I'm doing is I'm holding the needle without the lock on. And why I'm able to do that is because the shaft of the needle is not round. It's somewhat oblong or rectangular. And that's the working part of the needle that enables you to put your needle holder on. But it also enables you to gently rotate your needle forehand and backhand over the top. And I would be showing this to you down on the screen, but I have lost, most disturbingly, the focus on this camera. So I can actually practice pirouetting my needle over the top all the time. So one way to do it and practice this is use other low fidelity models. So I've got a banana here, and I'd be doing this on the table if the camera was working. But I've made an incision in the banana, and at 1 centimeter intervals, I've made a mark, a line. And what I need to do is to practice taking my needle in and out of the banana. So the first thing is, that was a straight incision. So I line my needle 90 degrees across the banana, rotate it back, and rotate it out on that 90 degrees. Place, point, rotate. And the thing is, I've got these lines here that enable me to practice the line up. Once I'm familiar with doing that, I can simply just put a dot either side and practice taking my needle in and out of the banana, making sure it goes in on the dot and out of the dot. Now you can see that is quite easy if you've got two edges sitting together. And I would urge you, please, never, ever, ever take your needle through two edges unless they're sitting together. Because if it's like that, you can appreciate 90 degrees there and 90 degrees there are two different angles altogether. And the problem is that many people bend and torque the needle through the tissue to try and shortcut through there, twist it round and force it through the other side, when the vector there and the vector there is at two different angles. And the important thing is with stitching, you only take it through two if the two legs are together. If it's separate like this, it's 90 degrees in or 90 degrees out, and they're done separately. If you don't do that, you're not going to get good apposition, and certainly in closing skin, you will not get the slight eversion that we require. you can practice on a banana model simply going up and down, and you don't need a thread, up and down on those all the time. And you'll find over time that the banana actually blackens. So again, the tissue is actually holding the needle, pick it up, rotate it out. There you go. Rotate it in. Pick it up and rotate it out. And over time, the banana itself will indicate how cleanly you've gone in and gone out. A curved incision like this, you'll notice that the vector at this angle here and the vector at this angle here, there and there, that is coming this way, that is going that way, and it's probably 70 degrees difference. And if you're focusing on stitch, 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 stitch on a curved incision like this, by the time you get here, the angles will be lost in 90 degrees. And what you'll find is that the whole stitching is determined by that 90 degrees across what you want to stitch. So a bit like the potato, align your needle 90 degrees across the edge and then work out your body angle. You'll find that as I'm stitching from there to there, the weight distribution is going from my right leg to my left leg at this position. Right leg to left leg. And it's for you to work that out because we're all different sizes and shapes. But the fundamental is you got to be able to pick your needle up properly, just beyond the halfway, no space between the tip and the shaft, and it's angled out. Of course, much of what we're doing in surgery is operating around in circles. So by simply taking an apple corer to a banana, it is possible to take out a piece of skin of the banana, and now that challenge is to go to stitch literally around the clock. So if you are standing here as a surgeon at 6 o'clock, you need to be able to take sutures around on the hour, every hour. But you'll find when you get to here at about 4, 5 o'clock or 4:30, you're ending up stitching in to your right shoulder if you're a right-handed surgeon. And stitching into your right shoulder means that this is the most difficult stitch to do. And what you need to do in that circumstance is change the weight distribution from your right leg to your left leg to literally unwind to continue backhand. So you'll find yourself going around backhand from 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and then between 10 and 11, literally diagonally opposite, you're swapping around to forehand again. All the time, your needle position is perfectly perpendicular to the edge. So that is on the radius at 90 degrees all the way through. That, it determines your body position. And that requires you, when you're stitching, to literally say, point, place, rotate, point, place, rotate. And before you even do that, you've got the 1, 2, 3 check on your needle. I recommend that you do this all the time, every time, and say it to yourself as you're practicing your stitching. You do not need animal material. Simple, low-fidelity models like the banana and the potato are absolutely ideal for this. Thing is, in my 35 years of surgery, I've not come across any synthetic material akin to an organic material. I call these my splash models because they're giving you instant feedback when your needle rotation is poor. On a microwave potato, the needle would tear the skin and you'll mash the potato. On the banana, you'll split the banana. But of course, some of you might be doing microsurgery, and in that circumstance, and this is Castroiello's, even on a small needle, the mounting is exactly the same. But of course, in the Castroiello's, you've got to roll the barrel, and the whole hold of a Castroiello needle holder, a micro needle holder, is extended fingers, bringing the lumbricals into contact with the instrument and allowing the instrument to roll in your fingers as a simple movement. But that angle and principle of just beyond halfway, no space between the tip and the shaft, and the angle out is likewise just as important. So these simple principles I've told you on the ergonomics and angles apply to small needles and to big needles. And I'd commend that you focus on those angles and attention to that detail all the time. And this is what I've described and published as the diastolic learning. Because the heart, when it speeds up, when you look at the heart and the chest, is rocking naturally like this. And as it speeds up, the rhythm is maintained. The difference between an expert surgeon and a training surgeon is literally the flow and the rhythm of the operation. That comes not by frenetically stitching, but understanding the natural economy of movement and time. That all comes down to how you pick your needle up and your alignment to the tissues. Now, 90 degrees is the perfect angle because it's the fourth part of the circle and was described by Euclid as the ultimate angle, because each and every angle to 90 degrees is equal and 90 degrees. And if you look around where you're sitting at the present moment in time, in front of a TV screen, look at the door, look at the window, we are surrounded by 90 degrees. And I put it to you that we're thus automatically wired to identify 90 degrees. And I've done that as a study as well, where we've asked people to take 290 degrees out of 20 slides, showing an angle of 86 degrees to 94. And the accuracy is more than 95%. It is a simple, straightforward principle that you can start applying to your surgery now. And I invite you to send me pictures of your attempts at stitching. And we're actually running a competition with the Black Belt Academy, which closes on the 1st of July, is simply send me a photograph with your email and a short description of the model, and you too can win your own set of instruments. And that will come in a bespoke pack like that, including Macindosh scissors, DeBakey forceps, mosquito, scalpel blade handle, and all the basic tools that you need to practice. The operating table that we have at home that goes up and down is the ironing board. You wouldn't iron up here, and you wouldn't iron down here. You would naturally set it at a comfortable height for the functional anatomy of your upper limb. And surgery is all about being comfortable, being relaxed, and using the small muscles of the hands. I'm sorry I seem to have lost the focus on the camera. I was working perfectly last week, installed in a cupboard, so I have no idea what the issue is, and I'm now extremely concerned that I've got a major problem. But I hope that makes sense. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us for this session. I'm very happy to take questions from anybody. I was given 40 minutes, and I think I've kept to 40 minutes. Thank you very much indeed. And remember, this is all free on Medal, and you can follow us live on Monday evenings. Thank you. Any questions? Did somebody? Okay, so Dr. Kibibi.
Yes, I'm Dr.
Want to
Kapil
ask a question? Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. This is time for question and answer. If you have any question, please, you can use the chat box or you raise up your hands. So the first person I'll be calling on is Dr. Kibel Gonfa. Please, you can ask your question now.
Thank you for your very nice and interesting presentation. But I have one question. The needle the professor shows us was slightly almost a straight one. What we have in Ethiopia is most of them are highly curved one. How can you make this into straight, or is that the needle which is already ready-made?
No, it's not straight, it's all curved. All my needles are curved. Now, what's interesting about the history of the surgical needle is that you can appreciate that surgical needle is curved because you would not be able to take a straight needle through tissues at depth. So the surgical needle evolved as soon as we were able to start stitching things at depth. And that came about at a time when the swage of a needle was developed. But I've been chatting to the CEO or retired CEO of Ethicon to find out more when surgical needles become curved. The thing about the curved needle is that you need to understand the geometry of that. And all needles are either half or 1/8, half, 3/8, or 5/8. It's interesting why they are on eighths. And again, this is a mystery that is not being explained clearly. But the eighth shows how much of the circumference of a needle is made. So a half length would be half circle, 5/8 would be 5/8 of the circle, and 3/8, 3/8 of the circle. Now, obviously, the greater the curve, if you hold the needle further back along too far, and I'm rotating it back, you can see that point is not pointing into the tissue. So the limitation of pronation and supination, determines what I call the backswing from place point of the needle. So if you're too far back, as I am on this needle, if I go too far back, I'm not able to point that directly into the surface. Okay? So that's the first thing. If you're actually rotating the needle back and it doesn't point into the surface, you're not holding it in the right position with the needle holder. If I'm holding the needle holder with my fingers, you'll immediately see that my rotation is curtailed. And that's why we recommend that you hold the needle holder in the palm of your hand, because that is with the axis of pronation and supination. I remember starting as an SHO, spending weeks walking along the corridor literally with a needle holder in my hand, practicing taking it on and off. Next question.
Thank you so much for the answer. Okay, Nibo, please can you ask your question now?
You muted, sir? You on mute?
Okay, while we are waiting. Okay.
Is it audible now?
Can
Okay.
hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. It is an honor to have this webinar with one of our renowned cardiac surgeons. So initially I was expecting ergonomics in operating device and like laparoscopy and so on. But still needle ergonomics is one of its kind, so it has to be proper and appropriate. And as well, appreciate offer of the training device. So going to my question, do these organic materials like banana and potato preferable than the synthetic materials? If so, how?
Sorry, I missed that about the organic materials.
This
Could you-
potato and banana and so on for training than the synthetic materials like sponges and other body materials for training and stitching. For example, in our labs, we often have the synthetic materials.
Yeah, the line is not very good, but the models that I'm showing you, the banana, the potato, and what I use for 6 O's and 7 O's is actually a poached egg. And you poach an egg and make a little arteriotomy in the membrane over the yolk of the egg. And you take your 7O needle, I'm not using a thread here, needle only, in and out of the egg. Now, that too, if you actually not careful with the needle rotation, you end up scrambling the egg. The thing about all these models, the banana, potato, and the egg, they're giving you immediate feedback if your rotation is poor. I've got further exercises for the egg. If you boil an egg, so it's hard, cut it in half, and now you take your needle in the space between the yolk and the white, and you take it in and rotate it out without scrambling the egg or cutting the white. These are all difficult models, and they're deliberately difficult because what it's doing is reinforcing lightness of touch and reinforcing the correctness of rotation of your needle. And it's vitally important that you're able to take your needle cleanly and out of the tissue. Personally, I've seen suture pads, and the suture pads are actually used, and there's excess force in taking the needle in and out of the suture pad. Now, what we're going to be talking about tomorrow evening, and what I haven't mentioned this evening, is the forceps. So if you look at this banana, and I, on this side, grab the banana with the tooth forceps, and on the other side, the banana with non-tooth forceps. And this is only an hour ago. And if you look at this, look at the edge, look at the full thickness damage done to that. Because I often see that people are so focused on the stitching, they're forgetting that their left hand is grabbing or dragging the tissues away. And that is why when I run my suturing workshops, whether it is for cardiac surgery or in the Power Excellence courses or in my basic surgical skills, we start our stitching skills with our non-dominant hand behind the back. The other advantage is with your non-dominant hand behind your back it is maintaining the lumbar lordosis and ensuring that you are standing properly and not hunched over. It's interesting to note, as soon as you introduce forceps, the whole technique goes out the window again. People start grabbing the needle with the forceps and delivering the needle with the forceps. That is wrong. You should not be using the forceps to manipulate, deliver, or change the angle of your needle. With practice, you can actually get the needle to work for you without touching it with the forceps. The small exception to that is that when the tissue is so thin, and I'm thinking in cardiac surgery in the atrium or on the lateral side of the right coronary artery, the needle is not supported. But in most cases, the tissue holds the needle ready to pick it up. So if you've stuck to the rules, rotated the needle properly, it'll come out of the tissue at 90 degrees. You iteratively deliver it, and you can pick it up in the right position to repeat. And these models enable you to practice that skill. Place, point, rotate, repeat, but checking your angles all the time. And the angle is always determined by 90 degrees across what you want to stitch. Rotate back so it's 90 degrees into what you want to stitch.
Thank you very much. When it comes to protecting the lumbar lordosis, most commonly, well, I'm a surgeon, so what we encounter is there might be differences in the height of individuals or teams on the operating table. So the nurses, the surgeons, and the other assistants could have different heights, and so the elevation of the operating table could be at different distances to us, and sometimes going forward.
Well, there are two simple things that are often forgotten and where people run into difficulty. The operating table goes up and down. And when we run our basic surgical skills courses with ironing boards and people rotate from one table to the next, the first thing we want them to do is just the height of the operating table, so that your arms are actually in a relaxed position. The second thing is, and it's not a criticism at all of scrub nurses, but often the needle's passed to you, mounted, without attention to the 3 points and principles. The surgeon, on seeing this, should immediately correct it to put it at the tip, just beyond the halfway, no space between the shaft and angle out. Now, if you explain this to a scrub nurse, it's always a pleasure to get a needle mounted correctly, because that takes out that extra move and problem. One way to check the move and mount is put your needle against the palm of your finger, like that, okay? And I can feel that there's no space between the tip and the shaft. I'm just beyond the halfway, and you can see I've come in at an angle. I know that is mounted correctly. If I want to do it backwards, I simply turn the needle upside down, and now I've got the needle ready to mount backwards as well. And checking it with the palm of your finger, you're not going to stab yourself, but you're also making sure that is correct. When you take it out of the packet, of course, when you see it in the packet, it is mounted and you can only see half the needle. You can then apply your needle holder at the right angle, and the position of the needle in the packet is perfect to put it at the tip as well. So those little things actually help you get the needle positioning correct. What happens is you do this the first time you pick the needle up, but you don't pick yourself up and doing it again and again and again. Any other questions?
Hi.
Hi. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. The first, thank you for the lecture. And I want to the difference between needles and switcher number.
Ah, yes. Well, there's plenty online to actually look up at the different types of needles and the different types of sutures, and that is something that it would be too difficult to go into at the present moment. The needles are basically determined on how much of the circumference. As I said, it's either a quarter, half, 3/8, or 5/8. Why it's on eighths, I haven't got the answer yet. The different sizes, the distance between the tip and the swage is the chord length, as in any circle. The anatomy of the needle, of the point, is very variable. And there are different types of cuts depending on what the needle is for. The needles are progressing at a pace because of the different types of alloys that are used. I was introduced to a kryptonite needle by Ethicon for coronary surgery. It was called Everpoint. What's interesting is that I noted that this needle had changed. I brought it up with the rep and said to him, "You've changed the needle." And he came back and said, "No, we haven't." 4 months later, he returned and said, "Terribly sorry, yes, the manufacturers had changed the needle, but didn't tell the reps." But obviously 20 years of using 7/0 needles, although they're very fine and thin, because you're holding the needle holder lightly, you become acutely aware of any changes at all. In fact, I think I could tell the difference between the VisiBlack needle that was made in Germany and the VisiBlack needle that was made in the United States, because I think the alloy process was slightly different and one needle was harder than the other. As the technology gets better, the needles have got smaller, and somebody mentioned laparoscopic surgery. It's interesting to look at laparoscopic surgery and look at the way the needle is actually taken through the tissue. And I was delighted to see that they're about to launch a endoroller needle holder that literally does roll the needle through the tissue. What they're working on is a catch and pickup system. And if they do that, they'll literally have something akin to a sewing machine that is able to roll the needles through the tissue. What I worry about when I look at much of the laparoscopic surgery is that the angles and the rotation of the needle is even more exaggerated and clumsy. And I think the needle is almost gaffing or fish hooking tissues. And to me, that doesn't look very clean at all. But I was delighted to see this new invention for laparoscopic surgery. There's a lot to this topic. If you go to catch up on MEDAL, I've summarized it in 4 parts. So there's 4 hours at least of this. And I've also have other parts on MEDAL talking about the different points of the needle and also different sutures themselves. That's all free. It's all on catch up. All you need to do as a healthcare practitioner is register your name.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was a very practical session. Time is now far spent. Thank you for honoring our invitation, and thanks to BBASS for extending formal invitations to ORG. And it's been an insightful session. There's lots of positive feedback in the chat box. I know it's a very broad topic,
Yes.
and we might have to continue from where we stopped. I mean, have it in series, and I've also thrown open the link to join us in the chat box. for the benefit of
Yes.
everyone.
You'll find the full series, part 1 to 4, is there as I describe it all. I do apologize with the camera issue this evening. When we sign off, I'm just going to double check on that, and I'm not sure what has actually happened.
There's no problem.
If there is a problem, that's giving me a bit of a headache. But anyway, I hope it's made sense. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you all well, and do join us on Medal. The link is in the chat, and look forward to meeting you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks a million. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on your time zones. Bye, 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 bye.